My name is Adam Coffey. It's nice to speak to all of you today. I've been around the block a while. Some things about me. I always tell people I blame the Army for leadership, discipline, teamwork, things like that. I'm a pilot, I'm an engineer, and my wife would tell you that makes me an anal, retentive, strategic planner, never shooting from the hip. You always have to be able to adjust when you own a business. Things like COVID happen, things that are unexpected, but never without a plan. There's always a plan, did some Fortune 500 time at GE. Back in the Camelot era. I call it the Camelot era of GE. Before all this tech stuff happened, it was when Jack Welch was the CEO. GE was the world's most admired company. I was a young guy, started as an engineer, crossed over, and then GE taught me how to run a business. Was a turnaround guy within GE. But stock was splitting every 2.5 years. In the 10 years I was there, stock split 4 times. And as a young man, I just looked up and I thought money always rained from the sky, and that was normal, and so it was funny because after I left GE, the stock never, achieved that value ever again. It was like downhill from there for 20 some odd years. But I blame GE for teaching me how to run a business. I've been a CEO of 3 national companies. I've built 3 businesses on behalf of private equity firms, 8 different private equity firms. I built 2 of those businesses to billion-dollar enterprises during my tenure. They were different industries, but kind of commonalities is they were service companies. There was a medical service company that fixed CAT scanners and MRIs and medical equipment in hospitals. And then there was a commercial laundry company because medical wasn't sexy enough. I wanted to do something even sexier. So I took over a company and built a company in North America that had 70,000 laundromats. It was number 1 in Canada with a 90% market share, number 2 in the US. And I ran that for 3 different sets of companies and ultimately sold it for over $1 billion. I've been teaching at UCLA, Pepperdine, over the years, guest speaker. I have written 2 books, on private equity and on exits. More coming. I enjoy that. The academic side of me definitely has a future. I'm tired of being a CEO after 21 years, to be honest with you. I turned down a 4th CEO job today. It was hard. It was a lot of money, and I'm like, what? I've been doing this for 21 years. It's time to pivot. It's time to do something new. So, my goal and objective today, not to bore you. Zoom, sometimes that's hard to do, so I gotta get up and do the song and dance thing here, in my shack. I'm coming to you from Dallas, Texas. And so goal, don't bore you. And if I can give you just one piece of, one nugget of wisdom, whether you're watching this live or you wind up tuning in later, then this time will have been well spent. And ultimately, love to help prepare you kind of for the road ahead. So with that as kind of the base knowledge of understanding, I'll make sure that we have time to take some questions too at the end. So here's some facts. As I told you, built these 3 companies, 2 or 3 hit the enterprise value of $1 billion or more. My average multiple across my entire career for 8 different exits is 4 times multiple of invested capital. You have to keep in mind that I normally work in a place where buyout funds are at play. Every company that I started with had been in business for at least 40 years by the time I got there. So these are mature companies that have been around for a long time. And then I show up and I have to do something that they have forgotten how to do over somewhere in that 40-year period, which is how to grow. And so there's a lot of different ways I can go with this. And, the title of this presentation already gives this away. But, oftentimes when I'm talking to a room full of executive MBAs or people, and I put a slide like this up on the screen, and I talk about not the world of venture capital or startups where you go from $1 of revenue to $2 of revenue and you had 100% growth. Thank you. But from a mature company perspective, I often ask people, what do you think a good growth rate is. What makes sense to you? What sounds good? Because a 40-year-old mature company, you're not going to find one that's growing at 30% too often, right? So most people kind of zero in on that 10% mark, and they think, 10% is a decent growth rate. And I'm like, okay, it is a decent growth rate. Have you ever heard of the rule of 72 in investing? And according to the rule of 72, at 10% growth, it's going to take 7.2 years for a company to double in size. And, all of a sudden 10% growth doesn't sound very good anymore, does it? And you think about it in terms of private equity speak. If it takes 10 years to double in size, I'm going to assume you're growing earnings and you're growing revenue at the same pace, even though we want to do something different there, that if the multiple is the same, essentially equates to a 2 times multiple of invested capital. And guess what? If you are a private equity firm, you are out of business at 2x. It's going to take you at least 3 to 4x if you're a small PE firm to raise the next fund. And so growing at 10% just isn't going to cut it. And so when you come in, and you're getting your company, as a search funder who's closing that deal, you got to get focused on, first of all, what is the right level of growth that we're looking for? And, how are we going to get there? And so, as I said, the title kind of got you there already. To be successful, you need 3x or better multiple of invested capital for your investors. And that really means a sustained growth rate of 30%. So you're going to walk into a business, because most search funders are going to be buying companies that have been around a while and they're not growing at 30%. If they are, we probably couldn't afford them. They'd be wanting so much for them. So we got ourselves a new business. It's growing in the single digits, most likely. And it's like, okay, first up, we got to somehow take this business that's been around for a really long time and figure out how we're going to bend the growth curve. And I've done this in every company I've run over the last 21 years, been able to bend the curve and then sustain the growth rate at 30%. So today I'm not going to have enough time, to get into just the total level of detail, but I'm hoping I'm going to touch on some things that get you thinking. So at a 30% growth rate, company doubles in size in 2.8 years, triples in size at 4.2 years, and it quadruples in size in just over 5 years. And that is the typical hold period for private equity. And search funds really are just a subset of private equity. I hear oftentimes people talking about venture capital. Venture capital is private equity. Private equity is the world of private capital. There are buckets inside there. The biggest one is buyout funds that buy bigger mature companies. But venture capital is certainly the sexy piece that everybody knows about. Thank you, Mark Cuban, and the TV shows. But I got to tell you, in the VC world, seldom do I ever see a prospectus or a circular where the historic multiple of invested capital is something that's higher than about 2.5. And you can do that in the stock market. So you lose liquidity. VC is a dangerous world for people to play. But a lot of people love to play there because it's sexy. And I get that. And we're a little boring in the buyout world, but search fund is a piece of that. And so we need to quadruple a company in size in about 4 to 5 years in order for our investors to be happy, in order for us to be happy, because let's face it, search funders, we're not here doing this for free. We're not a charity. We may do charitable work, but we're seeking to make money with our business. And so we got to do something different. So how does private equity, which includes search funders and buyout funds and all of those pieces of capital, how do you hit organic growth? Well, there's really 3 main buckets that we're going to talk about today. There's organic growth. We all know what organic growth. I'm not talking about marijuana or CBD here. We're talking organic is, the natural increase, selling more stuff, for more money, whatever. There's organic growth. There's margin expansion, because here what we're really talking about is 30% growth rate is earnings. It's EBITDA. It's the earnings that we're talking about growing at 30%. Revenue in our world matters. You always want it to be going north. But if you can grow earnings at a sustained 30% rate over time, it's EBITDA, and selling a multiple of EBITDA is how we're going to get paid in the world. So margin expansion is in play here. If we can lower the cost of goods, or services that we provide, that equals earnings growth, which is a piece of this 30% magic. And then there's this thing called buy and build. And we're going to touch on buy and build, because essentially when you buy a company using, a search fund, you're doing the first part of the buy and build. You're just not necessarily doing the build yet. So I want to give you some examples about what happens when we do that. So organic growth, typical levers, price. If I can sell the same amount of stuff at a higher price, I'm going to increase revenue, right? Or increase volume, selling the same, at the same price, but selling more of my widgets, my product or service. That certainly is in play. And then there's what I call pivot, a strategic pivot. So let's talk about each of those for just a second. I got to be honest with you. I have never yet walked into a company where pricing was optimized. Matter of fact, most companies where I walk into, no one even owns price as a full-time job or as a full-time process. Too many times it's a function of sales, and it's an afterthought of sales. And every once in a while, maybe it's every couple of years, someone says, geez, should we raise prices, of our product or service, but there's no one actively managing price. And I've been able to walk into every company that I've run and immediately start focusing on raising prices. If you think about like Amazon, all day long, thousands, tens of thousands of times a day, they're doing constant A/B testing where they're jacking up the price in one market versus another, and they're watching what happens from a sales perspective. How do two widgets sell in two different markets at two different prices? My laundromats, we used to use data science, and build polynomial regression models. And we would do time of day pricing. If the peak is 6 p.m. when everybody just got home from work, guess what? Laundromat prices just went up 25% for the next 3 hours. And then if we wanted people to be doing laundry at 10 o'clock in the morning, we would be lowering the price during the day to get people out during the day. And what we were monitoring was, we called it turns, but the number of times a day a washer and a dryer was being used in a laundromat. And we're not seeking to cannibalize revenue by lowering prices during the day. We're seeking to increase the total revenue coming out, of that laundromat, and the number of turns, the number of times that washer and dryer was working. So I would tell you, start with price. If we can sell the same number of things at a higher price, it's going to yield a better outcome. We also, though, want to increase volume, right? And then pivot. What does pivot mean? Well, let me just give you an example I think a lot of us can relate to. So let's just use a landscape company as an example. So we got a little company. It's a search funder company. We just bought it. By God, I got guys out there right now, and they are mowing the hell out of lawns everywhere, right? So we all understand what that company does for a living. They do blow and go. That's what it's called. Quick, get a team in there, cut the grass, blow it off, blow off the clippings, get out of town. What's a pivot? Well, what happens during the holidays? Well, a lot of people put up holiday lights, and every year it seems to happen earlier and earlier. Boy, in my neighborhood this year, it was like Halloween, like the pumpkins weren't even down yet, and the dudes were putting up Christmas lights. So an example of a pivot is, normally in the winter, a landscape company starts to slow down. Grass isn't growing as fast. There's not as much to do. An example of a pivot would be that company now starts offering an additional product or service that's ancillary, or it's a pivot to the side. It's not a far reach from what you've been doing, but it's something new. And so, when I was running the HVAC company, we were actually a refrigeration service company working in grocery stores, keeping grocery stores cold. And I'm like, well, why aren't we doing the HVAC box on top of the roof? Let's make a strategic pivot. Let's start expanding our focus of who our customer is and redefining it. And before you knew it, I grew an HVAC division. Starbucks was my largest customer, and I was servicing 6,000 locations. And so, I created an entire new division as a strategic pivot. My guys in their trucks had the right skill sets, but we were only selling into one customer. Make a strategic pivot. I acquired a couple companies, and before you know it, I had built this massive HVAC company to go with my refrigeration company. So pivot is important. Price is important. Can I sell more stuff? I can redesign the sales process, at this business that we're, how are we marketing our little landscape business or whatever that company might be, and am I maximizing online opportunities? Oftentimes in a search funder world, a more sophisticated owner comes in to a less sophisticated company who may be selling through traditional markets. And, you're an expert at digital marketing efforts. And so you've learned a lot, and, there are different ways that you can redesign the sales effort. I often find that cross-selling, then anytime you make a strategic pivot, now I have HVAC customers that I can sell refrigeration to, or I've got holiday-like customers that I can sell landscaping services to. And hey, while I'm there, another pivot is outdoor lighting. So while I'm cutting your grass and knocking over your lights and noticing that half of them don't work, how about I fix your landscape lights too? So there's all kinds of things that we can do. One of the things that I love to do, and I've done this in every company that I've run, is tiering my products or services. So let's talk about what that is in a little bit more detail. Everybody is familiar with Mercedes-Benz, right? Everybody out there knows Mercedes-Benz. They are the best example of a products company that has tiered their products and services. So everybody knows the S-Class, right? That's what we all want to drive. So if we all got enough money, we can spend $108,000 to about $130,000. We can buy an S-Class Mercedes. Do you know what S stands for? It stands for expensive. It's a expensive Mercedes. That's what the S-Class stands for. And if we don't quite have enough money to buy an S-Class, we can go to the E-Class. And the E is the economy version of the expensive Mercedes. And by God, if we don't got enough money for an E-Class, then, but we want the cachet of driving a Mercedes-Benz, we can go to the C-Class. And for as little as probably $29,000, if you get a stripped down one on a good day, maybe it's a 2021 model and a 2022 model year, you can buy a C-Class and you are styling, and driving your Mercedes-Benz. So oftentimes what I find in a product or a service company, we're developing kind of one product, one mindset, and we're dealing with one kind of customer. And I always use Mercedes-Benz for product companies, but I also like to use FedEx for service companies. Here's another great example. You remember when FedEx first started, all they did was FedEx Express. It was overnight by 10:30. And then they came out with FedEx 2-day air. And then they bought a few companies, but they created FedEx Ground. And so what they created was an ecosystem of services. Now, if you take FedEx and forget about Ground for a second and just talk about the express versions, in some markets, they had FedEx, in big cities, they have like FedEx next morning. It's like by 8:30. Then they have the standard overnight at 10:30. And then they have FedEx afternoon service. And then they have FedEx 2-day service. Something you may not know. All those packages are moved at the same speed, at the same time, by the same logistics system. When FedEx first came out with afternoon service, one of the problems they had was that the drivers of the trucks had both packages, the morning run and the afternoon run, were on the truck at the same time. And so they would go to a business and they were trying to be efficient for their company. And they would just like, well, I got 2 packages. I'm not going to drive back here. I'm just going to give you the afternoon package at 10:30 in the morning because I'm a good guy. And FedEx actually trained their drivers. In big cities, they'll use separate trucks, but in a remote route, you'll have the same truck. It was flown by the same airplane at the same speed, the packages, and they'll have the morning and the afternoon. And they had to teach their drivers, do not give the 2:30, or the afternoon package on the morning run, because our customers didn't pay for that service. And it's so they use one logistics system to move all packages, whether it's next day at 8:30, it's next day at 10:30, next afternoon or 2-day, they're all moving in the same logistics system at the same speed, but they're slowing down the delivery of the packages on the delivery end. And that's a classic example of something that you also can do with your search fund company if you're a service company. So go back to my landscape, company. Let's say that there's a real windy day in here in Texas, something that doesn't happen too often. It actually happens all the time, and the leaves are coming down. Maybe I've got customers who are paying extra and they're getting priority service, after a weather event. It happens also too, like in a northern climate where maybe you have a service company and you're snow plowing. And so how fast are you going to get to my house to shovel my driveway, Mr. Snowplow Man? And maybe it's, you're a gold customer. You're guaranteed to get, I'm going to be there within 12 hours, at the end of a snow event. And you're a silver customer and I'm going to get there by 24 hours after. And, you want your snow plowed, but you're not in such a rush because you're home zooming all day. Maybe you take the bronze level and you're paying for 48-hour, response. So oftentimes, doesn't matter what kind of company you've got, whether it's product or service, Mercedes-Benz or FedEx, there are different ways that you can add services. Here's something you need to remember too, and that is anytime you tier products and services, add a more expensive product. The reason is about 20% of your customer base is willing to pay more, and they buy based on, well, I want the Platinum Plus. What's different between it and the gold? I got no idea, but I want the Platinum Plus. So you got to make sure that you also think about, okay, what do I offer someone who wants to spend more? And then how do I also bifurcate and offer someone that's going to spend less? And what used to be my only product becomes the middle product, which is most people will continue to buy. And, that's a classic example. Here's something you may not have known about FedEx. Anybody ever seen this arrow? Now, I know some of you might have MBAs and, somebody pointed this out to you once upon a time, but let me tell you, 90% of the country or of the world, if they did not know that this little arrow was here, would have never seen it. But now that I showed it to you, your brain cannot ever again in its entire life look at a FedEx logo without immediately going to that arrow. And so it is, a different kind of little thing, but I just thought I'd point it out since we were talking about FedEx, right? So that's tiered products and services. So let's talk a little bit about margin expansion. So some of my levers, I want to increase my earnings. I want to get to 30%. And by the way, margin expansion is how we overcome the impact of inflation. My apologies that inflation is now at 7%. You got your work cut out for you today to try to figure out how am I going to overcome 7% of inflation just to stay even. So margin improvement helps you do that. You want to lower the cost to produce. You want to increase productivity. For me, that usually always includes technology, investments in technology. How can I automate things that are done repetitively and are done manually? And a good example, on a back office, if you're running a business and you got a lot of something that you have to process all the time, if you're doing something repetitively and it's continuous, that's probably something you can outsource relatively cheaply. And you have to think about the world as being a global workplace. And so I remember, anytime I've had a headquarters operation, I could go back and sit down with my accounting department or somebody and say, hey, what do you hate to do that you have to do 1,000 times a month? Oh, I hate doing this journal entry crap, or this processing this. Okay, what if I picked that up and took it off of your plate? Would you be a happy camper? Hell yes. Make that go away, please. Adam, and I might ship that to the Philippines or someplace else where I can leverage a lower cost work environment to get repetitive, easily trained activities done without pissing off, my workforce that was here in the States, because frankly, they didn't want to do it anyway. And then I started thinking about, well, outsourcing some things, actually, I can create a 24-hour work environment. My day shift where I'm doing business is working. Before they go home, they're doing a handoff to another group of people who are just getting up, coming to work in the Philippines. And while one crew's sleeping, another crew is moving the ball down the field. And before you know it, it's like I have an office that is running 24 hours a day and is becoming ultra efficient. So a lot of different things we can do to lower costs to produce a product or service, to increase productivity. Almost always there's a technology component, which requires some kind of investment. But let's face it, all of us who buy search funder companies, we are tech savvy people. We know what the heck we're doing. And we're the people to take an old, slow growth company and modernize it and start investing in some technology. So also want to talk just about challenging the status quo. So I'm going to go to my laundry days now. And I'm going to tell you that when I was driving around with collectors, because this company had hundreds of people who went out to laundromats. This is before cards. This is back in the days of quarters. And they would go out there and they would collect money out of quarters. And I was riding around with a guy's got like this big old key string, with like 1,000 keys. And you walk in a room, because I'm the president, they don't give me a rookie. They give me some guy who's been doing this for like 20 years. And he could walk up to any machine in any room. He could whip out a key without even looking, go to the machine, and it would open it up. And then he'd get the quarters out and he'd get another key and open up the next one. And I'm like, man, that's a magic key string. Give me that damn thing. Let me try that out. I put that on my belt. I get up there, nothing opens. Damn, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, why does this guy got 1,000 keys? What's the story behind all this? I found all this security around keys. In each office, there were keys. There were keys in little bins on the wall. There was concertina wire and barbed wire fences. There's a guy in there who looked really mean, and he was protecting the keys. There were cameras up on the wall watching the guy who was watching the keys. And I'm like, who's on the other end of them cameras? Oh, it's loss prevention, man. Yeah, you don't want to mess with them, So it's like, I'm like, why do we got all this crazy ass security around keys? And I finally found a 70-year-old guy named Fred. Fred was wandering around in the plant one day, and he told me the story. And he said, back in the 1960s, Fred had been there forever. He was in his 70s. And I think Fred's still there, matter of fact, by the way. He's probably in his 80s now, but he's just a permanent fixture. But he told me about, in the 1960s, there was the gentleman lockpick. The number one problem with theft in the company was a well-dressed person who taught all of his buddies how to pick the locks on the machines. And they would stake out the laundromats to find out when we were going to collect the money, because that's when they knew the machines would be full. And then they would go in the day before, or a couple of days before we got there. They pick all the locks, they steal all the money, and put the machines back together all nice and pretty. And then the collectors would show up to get money, and there's no money there. I was like, well, why isn't anybody doing laundry? And this was such a big problem that they created this very complex security system around keys. And they ordered proprietary keys that nobody else in the world, a locksmith could not get these keys, and they couldn't make keys. They did all this to defeat the gentleman lockpick. And so I went to loss prevention, the guys behind the cameras, and I said, hey, folks, when's the last time anybody ever picked one of our locks? Oh, man, I don't know. I bet, 40 years ago, 50 years ago. Oh, great. Problem solved. What's our biggest problem today? Crackhead with sledgehammer. Crackhead with sledgehammer leaves no doubt that he went in your laundromat. He goes in there with a torch or a big sledgehammer, and he beats the hell out of the machines until they capitulate and give up all their quarters, right? And I'm like, okay, we made it so hard for our collectors to collect. They are so unproductive because of a problem that happened 40 years ago that isn't even happening today. And so I started an initiative called One Room, One Key, One Lock. And instead of 1,000 keys, the guy would carry 100 keys. And instead of having to have muscle memory for how far down to like reach and grab, I could take any collector on any day of the week, put them on any route, and say the top key matches your first location, which we're now using satellite, dispatch and routing and navigation. And when you get to that location, the same key opens up every lock, and then you flip it down to the bottom. Guess what? The second key now opens up every machine in the second stop, on your route for the day. Collector productivity increased by over 40%. It got so productive that we were breaking axles on trucks. They were driving down the Los Angeles freeways, hitting a pothole. They had too much weight because there's too many quarters, because $50,000 in quarters weighs over a ton. And so collectors were driving back to the mothership to drop all their quarters, and they were busting axles as they were driving down the road. And I'm like, I didn't see that problem coming. We had to redesign the vaults to make them more capable of handling the weight. So what's the point I'm trying to make here? Ask why. Ask why to everything. What typically happens, you ever heard the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, just because it ain't broke doesn't mean it's efficient. And what I often find on small companies is they do things today the same way they've done them for years, not because they add any value, not because there's any purpose, but because this person taught that person how to do a job. And here's the 10 steps, and here's everything that we have to do in order. And so I'm all about process, process improvement, find bottlenecks, redesign process, simplify process. And I typically find that by investing in technology, by focusing on process improvement, let's start by asking, why do we do the crazy things we do every day? You can find ways to increase productivity. You can find ways to increase margins, which again is a piece of your growth. So let's talk about buy and build real quick. So what is buy and build? Well, you're doing the buy part. And then I suppose you're doing some build part when you're improving these companies and you're amping up their growth. You're doing your strategic pivots. You're asking why we do crazy things, and you're raising prices. You're doing all this. But buy and build is the fastest way to grow a company. So typically when I get to a business, we're not talking small businesses. I'm getting into companies with hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. They're growing at single-digit percent. I can't make one of these grow at 30, 40% consistently and every year without doing some buy and build. Buy and build is the fastest way to grow, is to buy other companies. It uses other people's money. IRR is how most private equity funds and search funds are. It's not just multiple of invested capital, but it's how fast do you get me my capital back and how much money we make. And IRR is a percent, and it's time dependent. And M&A is very efficient with capital. I'm using someone else's money and I'm buying companies. So what you did once can sometimes be done twice. You have to be in a fragmented industry. And a lot of the industries that we play in would be considered fragmented. So I was talking about landscape companies as an example. Boy, there's thousands of those in every city around the country. Lots of fragmentation. You got to have a scalable platform, which means you have to be able to integrate a business. You got to be real disciplined. Don't chase shiny pennies. Know what good looks like before you decide to buy something, and then only buy stuff that is good. Because when you do one bad acquisition, it can totally ruin your life for years. It can distract you. It can create headaches and problems. And so let's talk about multiple arbitrage, because what I do on a big scale, you can do on a small scale. So a company I ran, fact, traded for a 13 times multiple. Fact, I bought 20 companies, average price 5 times EBITDA. Why were the small companies selling for 5 times and the big one was selling for 13 times? Size. When a company is bigger, it sells for a higher multiple than when a company is smaller. When an industry is highly fragmented, there aren't enough buyers to buy all the companies that are out there that potentially are for sale. We're living in a great era right now. Baby boomers. I'm a baby boomer. I'm the last year of the baby boomer, 1964. We're all getting old. We're retiring. Our parents are unfortunately passing away. And so there's a lot of companies out there that something has to happen from a turnover perspective, because everybody's getting old. We're aging out. So when you have a fragmented industry with thousands of companies, they trade for small price multiples, and the bigger companies trade for bigger multiples because they allow a private equity guy to put more money to work. And so those are worth more. So I was buying companies at 5 times. I was trading at 13 times. The banks would let me borrow 5 times. That's how much my earnings would cash flow for debt service. I bought 40 million of EBITDA, essentially 20 companies on average, 2 million each. It adds 520 million of shareholder value because it's 40 million times my 13, right? It cost me 200 million to buy because I paid 5 times, that 40 million of EBITDA, to buy it. The banks loaned me the 200 million to do it. I didn't even use 1 penny of equity, just total debt financing. And then when I put it all together and I sell it, my shareholders earn 320 million of profit, pure profit of me using someone else's money. So you're saying, okay, I'm a search funder. I got a small company. Okay, let's get in there. Let's get some traction. Let's bend the curve. Let's start increasing organic growth, volume, price. Let's improve operations. Let's make our strategic pivots. Let's do all these things. And as we start finding success, let's see if we can't then also find another company that looks like us, that might be close by, different market, new market. And then let's see if we can't start doing a little bit of buy and build, or what I'd call a mini buy and build. private equity is having a lot of problems right now. There's not enough companies to buy. So they're coming smaller. They're going to the smaller companies, into the world. And what I'm seeing now, because I sit on boards, is, I'm on multiple boards right now of a large global bank, 500 billion in assets under management, a private equity firm, and they both are doing buy and builds, and they can't find anything that makes sense to buy. So they're like going to search fund size, and they're buying like 5 or 6 really small things, slamming them together to make enough clay to then do this buy and build thing and to start building something bigger that makes sense. So a lot of people are doing it. You can do it too. Maybe you don't buy 20, maybe you buy 2 over a 5-year period. You do the other things that we're talking about. Before you know it, you got a 30% growth curve. You're hitting your numbers. And of course, as I said, we're not charities. As we get towards the end of our little run there, we say, hey, it's time to monetize this asset. I'm going to sell it to one of these private equity guys, and I'm going to talk to them about all this stuff I did during my hold period, where I was running this business. And then I'm going to take that money, I'm going to go do it again. Right. So, this is another big way to do it. Everybody knows what these 2 symbols are, right? I just want to point something out. I've been doing a snap poll at every class I've taught at universities for about the last 10 years. And when I walk into a room, I ask, usually about 50 to 70 people, how many people own an Apple product? And I got to tell you, it's at least 90% of the hands go up in the air. Okay, great. How many of you people who own an Apple product, actually, if you went somewhere in your house, still have the empty box that product came in? Raise your hand. It's 90%. And I've been doing this for 10 years. 90% of the world, because these are global student populations that I'm talking to, 90% of the world owns an Apple product. 90% of the world that has one still has the empty box in the closet. Why? Don't know why. We just have an affinity. If I then ask to get a joke, I say, how many people on the planet, how many of you that raised your hand, how many people own a Dell computer? How many of you got a Dell computer box in your closet? And it's only engineers who raise their hands because they think they get more money on eBay when they sell it if they got the box that came in. But 90% of the world doesn't keep a Dell box. Why am I talking about boxes? Well, first of all, Beats Audio is the only company on the planet that ever came close to this phenomenon. And of course, Apple bought Beats, right? Bose made far better headphones, better noise cancellation, but they were coming in boring boxes. Beats is Dr. Dre, man. It's cool stuff. It's red. It's got great colors. The packaging for the original Beats Audio stuff was amazing. And so very similar to Apple. Why do I mention this? Because when you run a search fund or company, you're eventually going to be selling. And when you're going to be selling, you're going to be selling to people. It might be a private equity firm, but it's people. And people are influenced the same way they are when they look at an Apple box. So every time I take over a company, I build a new headquarters and I make it sexy. I don't spend so much money that we're going to go broke or anything. On $100 million EBITDA company, I might spend 2 million, 2.5 million, which as a percent of earnings isn't a big deal. This one was the laundry company. So it was white for clean, blue for water. The bubbles on the left were soap. And then I had my Apple icons up on the wall. You see those, talking about what the core beliefs and values of the company were. I put together this museum of the last 100 years of laundry equipment, all the way back to the hand cranked, machine going through a rack, and I built a technology center so I could demonstrate where all the technology was being used in our company, built a modernized plant, did a bunch of different things. But the bottom line is human nature. When you have a dumpy ass looking building and a dumpy ass looking headquarters and some private equity guys come rolling through, first thing they do is they look around. They're like, okay, yeah, blah, blah, blah. It ain't very sexy, right? They go down to their spreadsheet and they say, what's the earnings of this business? What's the multiple this industry trades at? And what's the price I'm going to offer for it? When they come to one of my companies, those same people look around and they're like, damn, I wasn't expecting this out of a laundry company. I could talk more about what we did at this headquarters. There were murals on the walls from the 1950s showing our employees at work in the 1950s. And there was all this technology and it was so high tech, you quickly forgot you're talking about a laundry company. And then people would look at their spreadsheets and they'd go, okay, how much does this company earn? how much does this industry trade for? And now there's a new column. What's the premium I'm going to have to pay to own this asset? And if I want to take it off the, I want this in my portfolio for my investors to see how much of a premium am I going to have to pay to try to preempt this process and make it in. And I'll tell you, every time I sell a company, I absolutely get top dollar. If I had one turn on $100 million earnings company, that's an extra $100 million of shareholder value for something I paid $2 million for. That's a 50 times multiple of invested capital. It's the single most important investment I could make when I was going to sell a business. So we all know we're going to sell our business someday. We should, bottom line, when you walk in a business, people should know what you do for a living. They should know what you believe in. They should know what your culture is like, and it should become an immersive environment. And if you can pull that off on top of everything else we just talked about, you're going to get the premium valuation. Even if you're in a trading range, you'll push the envelope on the high end because what you got is sexy, and sexy sells. How do I know that? Because Apple taught me so. Okay. So that's it. You can read this later. There's 10 tips to success. Really, it revolves around people. Take care of people. People are the key. You are not God's gift to anything. You come in, you buy a business, and you become part of a family. You take care of your employees, they will take care of you. You build a strong culture. I always tell people when I go anywhere, I'm going to build a company where people can spend their entire career in one place. To do that, I got to do 4 things. I got to pay a fair wage or I'm going to lose talent. I don't want to lose talent, especially in today's world. It's hard to get talent. And then I got to have great benefits because we all get old, die, fall apart. And, we may look out the eyes of young people, but there's old Gomers looking back at us in the mirror now. I hurt in places I didn't know existed 20 years ago. So as a result of that, good benefits, got to have a good retirement plan if you're going to be able to stay somewhere for your entire life. Eventually you want to retire. But really the most important thing is I have to create opportunity. If we want employees to stay, we have to give them a path for personal growth. And you do that by building a successful growing empire. As you're growing your landscape company, your mowing company, whatever it is that you're doing, at some point you need an extra supervisor, you need an extra manager of this or that, the more, or you're opening up new locations, or you're expanding your product lines. A growing company is healthy. A growing company makes money, and a growing company can invest money in itself. So success breeds success. Taking care of people drives success. That's my ultimate goal and objective. The way I look at life is we all put our pants on the same way in the morning. And I use titles to organize my efforts, but the janitor in the plant adds the same value that I do as a CEO when I got 3,000 employees. So that's about it. That's my pitch. This is who I am. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to answer any questions, Karen, if anybody's got some.
I want to start off with a question. I want to let folks
You're
know
on mute, or I'm not hearing you.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
What it was my Bose speaker timed out. That's what it was. I had to turn it back on.
Okay. I have a question for you, and it relates to what you were talking about last, which was the employee piece of it. You've been through it several times now, all of the change management piece, taking something that's not growing very well or much, and then doing high growth. How do you bring the employees along, and what do you do if you realize that there may be some employee who's talented but isn't going to be able to come along for the growth?
That's a great question. I try to tell people you're the captain of a ship, and you have the responsibility for everybody who's on that ship. And I try to develop people. I try to invest in people. In companies that I've run, I have always sponsored people to get their MBAs. I've helped them get into universities. I've helped them get waivers. I help pay for things. So I'll do whatever I can to try to develop my workforce. But if I have someone who just cannot make the journey, then it's incumbent on me as captain of the ship to have to make a change, to have to say, hey, in order to look out for the health and welfare of all the people on my ship, I may have to set someone off and bring in some new talent. And I have this one weird thing about me. If you go on LinkedIn, I gave you a list of people that I've had to let go in my career. They all still follow me. They all still comment positively when I post things. And, it's how you treat people. It's how you take care of people. There are times where, unfortunately, life is going to cause you to have to impact somebody. And it may be because someone doesn't have, the juice to get you where you need to be because you've gotten bigger. I've run companies where I've gone from, I'm 100 million in revenue to now 250 to 500 to $1 billion. And it's like, you know what? The skill set at 100 is very different than the skill set it takes to run at $1 billion. And so I've had times, and the way I look at it is, as my private equity, sponsors are coming in and leaving and going out, and new sets coming in, we're evaluating talent. Where are we at today? Where do we need to go? Where are the potential hot spots where I may have an issue? And there have been times where I have parted ways with executives, just after a flip, and said, hey, you did a great job. We got a multi-million-dollar payday. God bless you. I made you a multimillionaire. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to let you go. And I'm going to give you your salary, and I'm going to take care of you. And I'm going to be a reference for you. And I'm going to help you find a job. And I'm going to, and so it's how you treat people that I think ultimately matters. And I would tell you that another one of my secrets, I'm always known for building strong cultures, but one of the things that I'm known for is building really strong, cultures, kind of a familial atmosphere about them. And I do that with transparency. I don't keep secrets. There are no secrets in my company at all. Anybody is going to know how much money we got, how much money we make, what our revenue is, what our EBITDA is. They're going to know at what side. Here's where we're at. When we get this big, I'm going to kick my current shareholders out and go get another set. You're going to know it's a good thing. And then we're going to do it again. We're going to get to here. Then we're going to go public, whatever the case may be. I'm just transparent. I tell employees everything. A dude in a truck may not know what the hell EBITDA is, but he knows how much we got. And if he wants to tune in, wants to ask questions, I make sure that the information is readily available and it's there. And, and so I'll do a town hall. My last company, I had 3,000 employees. I would do a town hall, and I would get over 1,000 people participating. Dudes in trucks would pull over, and, and people working in cubicles and in warehouses and all around the empire would stop whatever they were doing, sit down for 15 minutes, have a chat with the old man, and we would talk about what's going on, or I'd let them know, especially during COVID, let them know what was going on, or what was, what we were doing about it. And so being transparent is important. And you do have to make tough calls as a boss. That goes with the territory. I try to develop first. If I can't, I'll make a change.
You mentioned inflation and the cost, trying to save on costs being part of the inflation strategy. Are there any other ideas? Where we have a lot of folks who are first-time operators, and I'm sure that they weren't expecting an inflationary environment when they started going down this path.
When we started talking with price. I see a lot of companies doing a lot of things. The supply chain is disrupted. The supply chain is screwed up. And as a result of that, the world is inflating, right? Join the crowd, I guess, is what I'm gonna say. Don't be afraid to go right back to price or to add a variable fee if you're a service company. Very common for service companies right now to have some type of a fuel fee. Fuel prices have gone up more than 50% in the last 12 months. In some parts of the country, it's as high as like 70, 80%. You can't absorb that kind of a cost increase without passing it on to your customers. So you do that either with a higher price product or by adding some type of a surcharge if you are a service business. I know for a long time, airlines were adding, there's a fuel surcharge on a ticket. You buy the ticket, they show you the fancy $99 rate, and then they add, the federal excise tax of this and blah, 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 blah. Before you know, it's like that $99 ticket's $150. So, you can adopt those same types of practices. Do you love them? No. Can you always get away with them? Sometimes not with every customer. But you have to try, and so it's really difficult when inflation is 7% to find 7% productivity just to get back to zero. But what you're hoping to actually get with productivity enhancements is a couple of points over inflation of improvement every year. So kind of my magic formula for taking a bigger mature company to 30% growth is to try to get, organic growth into the low single digit, or I'm sorry, the low double digits, like around 10, just call it 10%. And then I'm going to use margin improvement to try to get an extra 2 or 3 points to get me to like 13%. I'm doing pretty good now for a mature company. And then I'm going to sprinkle in some buy and build. I'm going to make some strategic pivots, and do different things to raise my addressable market. And it's really the combination of all of that that gets me to 30%. If you're growing at 30% organically, God bless you, you're already done. If you want to go for 40, pay attention to what I said. But 30%, you're guaranteed a magical outcome. If you're less than 30%, you can start adding time to how long it's going to take you to have a successful exit. There is one thing I did not mention, which is happening today, but no guarantee it continues, and that's margin expansion. So maybe you paid 5 times earnings for something today, and tomorrow, a little bit bigger, you're selling it for 8 times, partially because money keeps flooding into private equity, and your logical buyer is then paying bigger multiples because they got to put a lot of money to work, and they're competing against other people that got to put a lot of money to work. And so the multiples keep going up. That HVAC company that I built, the multiples went from like 8 to 20 over about a 5-year period for a big, HVAC company. And that margin, or that multiple improvement can really save your bacon, when it comes to getting a good return on investment. But as interest rates go up, that means leverage or debt is going to get more expensive. And if it goes up too high, it's going to cost private equity more to leverage the company, and multiples will have to come down. So, a little bit of a bubble potentially there, but it's difficult. And the best I can tell you is, you have to squeeze your suppliers as best as you can. And you also have to raise your prices or add fees, whatever you can. You have to join the bandwagon. You can't be the only one who never raised a price while everything else around you's gone up.
That's so true. We have a question in the chat, and I have one last question. I know we're getting to the end of the hour, so I appreciate you being able to stay a little longer for these 2 questions.
Sure.
So you talked a lot about pivoting, and gave the example for the landscaper, and you talked about your the company with the HVAC and going onto the roof and all of that. I'm sure that when you're thinking about pivoting, you've got a lot of different choices that you can make, right? How do you narrow that choice down, or how do you think about making that choice? If you've got a couple of different options, how do you decide between them?
So one of the reasons why I typically am making a pivot is the base product or service that I'm providing has become somewhat commoditized. And so people can buy, from multiple people, the same product or same service. And so the price competition is driving down margin over time. And it's never fun to have to fight a price war all the way to the bottom. So when I think about pivots, I start to think about, if I've got 2 choices, first of all, I'm probably going to do both. But if I have to analyze the difference between them, I'd be looking at, okay, what's the margin profile of this pivot versus that pivot? And what's my likelihood of having a higher margin outcome, or there's a bigger addressable market, or I can now cross-sell the population multiple products or services. And so I'll start to look for, I have customers today, I'm selling them something today. Can I make a pivot that lets me now sell the same people I already know something new, something else that they need to buy product or service? And so it's looking for an interrelational dependency that you might be able to leverage some of your own existing strengths, like a customer base. I got a customer base. I'm selling them sunglasses. By God, if I could sell them jackets too, or whatever, it's like, it's constantly, it's thinking, what is my real magic here? Is it what I'm producing? Is it who I'm servicing? So a good example of that is Service Master. So, oftentimes too, I would tell you, you can, any problem you face today, trust me, someone else has faced it 1,000 times, and there's probably a good case study that you can plug into and try to learn more. But ServiceMaster was always a good example. Who was the customer of ServiceMaster? The homeowner. What were the different products and services? Well, they would roll a True Green ChemLawn truck to make your lawn green, and they had a Roto-Rooter plumbing truck to fix your plumbing, and they had Terminix to do your termite repair, or your mitigation or bug treating. It was like, and I may be off on which companies were which, but it's kind of like their magic was the customer, the homeowner, and they wanted to just, what all does a homeowner buy? Let's buy companies and provide products and services that do things homeowners need. We'll have a marketing effort around our customer, which is our golden jewel, and we'll leverage something. So you're always wanting to leverage something that's a strength of yours. It's not pivoting into the blue sky, doing something entirely new, and just for the hell of it. It's what's my magic? How does my pivot help me leverage that? ServiceMaster was a really good case study, really good example of a company that blew it out. They sold off a bunch of these companies, they spun them out and sold them. But that was a great example. My golden jewel is my customer. So what they did that you didn't know is you would call a different 800 number for each of these different companies. The same call center answered. And the same call center used the same system to dispatch all these different kinds of technicians out to your house. So they leveraged the infrastructure that they had. They leveraged the golden jewel, which was the customer, and it really was a marketing effort to cross-sell. And then they just rolled different trucks. So the only extra cost structure was the new truck, new guy doing something new, but they were leveraging the back office. They were leveraging the call center. They were leveraging the billing, and all of that. And they were targeting their marketing, to the one specific customer and just hitting them with different stuff and different things. So they were cross-selling, they were leveraging the back office, very successful strategic pivots, a good example.
Thank you for that excellent example. I'm going to get to a question from Shane in the chat. How long do you suggest learning the business we acquire before we start changing processes to improve efficiencies or start challenging the status quo?
I tell you, one trick to search funding is if you think you've locked on an industry, go work in a company. Maybe you're the undercover CEO, to be, right? But learn as much as you can from someone else who's running a business that's like something you want to run. First of all, see what good looks like, see what bad looks like, formulate an opinion, see if you even like, the damn industry or the company or what you're going to do. So I would tell you, it's always great to go work in a business. Even if you're just undercover, hey, I need a job. I'm, a college kid, whatever. And you're not, you're not, but it's like, get some experience in the industry you're thinking about jumping into. Once you get in, I always do something that I call as my discovery phase. And what I'll do is, if I come into a business, in my case, there might be 1,000 employees, in a search fund case, it may be a whole lot less, but I make sure I understand what every job is, so I assume I know nothing, even if I probably do. I go in, I'm a sponge, I'm a blank slate, and I start doing diligence and I start collecting data, and I'm not doing anything with it other than collecting it. Okay. If, I always go to a company and I look at my employee census and I say, what do I have? Where do I have groups of people? The biggest group of people in a laundry company is service techs. Next biggest one is collectors who get money out of machines. And then there's installers and people who move them around. And I'll go work, a few days inside each of these jobs with some people to really learn the job and to observe everything that they do. So when I get up top and I'm looking at a spreadsheet, I'm not seeing numbers and names. I'm seeing 3D jobs. Okay, I got a group of people called collectors. I remember walking around with the guy with all the keys and I remember taking my notes, and it's like, I make sure that I really understand what people do for a living, and I try to make a lot of observations. Then I come back. You have to remember something else too, is sometimes it's not just the things that you see, but it's the things that you don't see that you expected, to potentially find in a given size company that was doing something. And, and so oftentimes what you're not seeing is telling you just as much as what you are seeing. but it's like, thinking broadly, collecting a bunch of information, coming back and analyzing it, looking at it, starting to kind of aggregate it into themes. What you're trying to do is build up a strategic plan. Hey, here's 5 or 6 initiatives that I want to tackle based on observations that I saw. I'm probably going to involve the employees and, hey, I'm new. You're not, you're the experts. You're teaching me. And, this is what I'm seeing. What do you think? Help me, get me some buy-in on what it is that we're going to attack. If you can't measure it, can't attack it because you don't know if you're going to make a difference. You have to find things that can be measured. Sometimes I create my own metrics. When I went in the laundry company, I created a metric, machines per employee. How many machines do I got? How many employees do I got? I just created a metric. And so as we're getting productivity increases and enhancements, I could track over time and watch the machines per employee increase by 40%. How did I know I had a 40% increase in employee productivity? Because I made up a metric and I used that metric to track over time. And like when collectors became a lot more proficient because they didn't have to carry as many keys and anybody could go on a route and get the same kind of productivity, I could now have the same number of collectors collecting 40% more machines than what I had before. So, it's immersing, it's collecting information and data, trying to aggregate it into themes, coming up with kind of a multi-stage strategic plan. Here's the 4 things I'm going to focus on. Jack Welch always used to say, when there's 1,000 things broken, don't try to do 1,000 things. You're going to fail miserably. Do 4 or 5. Pick 4 or 5 things that you can build a measuring system around that you can focus on. And if you do a half-assed job of focusing on 4 or 5 things in a company that's got 1,000 things wrong, you're going to see the needle move. You're going to see improvement. And if you got some traction in one area, go to another 5 or 6 things in a different area. Key to that is usually to empower employees that you have to own certain activities or enhancements and then reward them. But you then as the leader aren't owning all of this stuff. Someone else owns it. Day shift manager, this guy, that lady, everybody owns a piece of this. You got a measuring system in place. And now you can spend some time with each of these people reviewing on a weekly basis. You can empower them to work across an organization and to make the improvements. And now you're managing, a process rather than leading the process. And, I would tell you too, that, the difference between leadership and management is, it can't be discounted. Managers manage things. They make stuff happen. Leaders inspire people. Think about Barack Obama. Let me use him as an example. I could use Ronald Reagan too. So I could be not favoring any party, but let's use Barack Obama for a second. What did he sell us? He sold us hope. What the hell is hope? You can't put hope in a box. Can't put it on a shelf. You can't sprinkle it, on your lawn and your grass, gets cut. It doesn't do anything. He sold us hope. Hope is intangible. What he could do is articulate a vision and get people to buy into a shared aspiration and run for him, and do things for him. Ronald Reagan had that gift as well. It's much more important for you to be a good leader of people than it is for you to be a good manager of things. Oftentimes in life, we have learned how to do things, but if we fail in inspiring people, we're going to get a mediocre result. So you got to have passion for people. You have to have passion for your business. Doesn't have to be sexy. It can be laundry. I ran a company that not a single human being on the entire planet, likes to do laundry, but they all have to do it. I didn't find passion around laundry. I found passion around people who worked in a laundry company. So you got to be a leader. You're going to use skills and manage things, but you got to inspire people. And, that's my answer to that.
Sounds like one of your next books is going to be on leadership.
Okay. Now I'm not hearing you again.
Right?
There it is.
I said, it sounds like one of your next books is going to be on leadership. Am I guessing right?
Well, if you go to adamecoffee.com, there's a video series I did at Pepperdine that I talk about Barack Obama and I talk about Ronald Reagan, and I have a whole thing on leadership and inspiring people that you can watch right now.
Okay. Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Adam, for being here.